The small town of Willow Glen lay blanketed in a late autumn chill, the crisp air carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves and hay. Nestled on the outskirts of town was Blue Haven Stables, a quiet and welcoming sanctuary for horses. For years, it had been run by Grace Harding, a soft-spoken but fiercely determined woman in her mid-30s. Known for her deep bond with animals, Grace had made the stables a second home for rescued and retired horses, each one finding a haven under her care. Among her herd was Aspen, a majestic chestnut mare with a silken coat and a distinctive white blaze running down her nose. At 10 years old, Aspen was the heart of Blue Haven, a spirited horse whose presence seemed to uplift every animal and human alike. Her deep brown eyes always seemed to understand more than they let on, and her playful nudges often coaxed a smile from even the grumpiest farmhand. Before we continue with the video and dive deeper into the incredible story, I want to ask for your help. I'm aiming to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and your support would mean the world to me. If you've been enjoying this content, please hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. One frosty morning, Grace noticed something unusual. As she made her rounds with a bucket of feed, Aspen stood apart from the other horses, her head bowed and her ears twitching nervously. Normally the first to nicker for her breakfast, Aspen didn't even glance at the food. "That's strange," Grace murmured, setting the bucket down near Aspen's stall. "You're never one to miss a meal." Aspen sniffed at the oats briefly, but didn't take a bite. Grace frowned and checked Aspen's water bucket. It was untouched. A sinking feeling began to stir in her chest. She reached out, running her hand along Aspen's neck. The mare stood still, but let out a soft, almost mournful whinny. "All right, girl, let's take a look," Grace said softly, her brow furrowed. She fetched her medical kit and carefully checked Aspen's temperature, teeth, and hooves, searching for any sign of illness or injury. Everything seemed normal. That evening, Grace sat by Aspen's stall with a growing sense of unease. Despite her best efforts to tempt Aspen with apples, carrots, and fresh hay, the mare hadn't touched a thing. The next morning, Grace called Dr. Emma Porter, the town's trusted equine vet. Emma arrived within the hour, her sharp eyes scanning Aspen as she entered the barn. A petite woman with silver streaks in her dark hair, Emma had cared for horses all her life and was known for her no-nonsense demeanor. "She hasn't eaten in over a day," Grace explained as Emma examined Aspen. "She's not herself, Emma. It's like something's weighing on her." Emma spent the better part of an hour conducting a thorough examination, checking Aspen's vitals and observing her movements. Finally, she shook her head. "Physically, she's fine. No signs of colic, infection, or pain. But Grace, horses are emotional creatures. Sometimes their distress isn't physical, it's emotional." Grace knelt beside Aspen, her fingers gently stroking the mare's soft muzzle. What could be bothering her? She's never been like this before. Emma gave her a thoughtful look. "Has anything changed recently? Horses are sensitive to shifts in their environment, new animals, people, even changes in routine." Grace shook her head. "Nothing's changed. At least, nothing obvious." "Keep an eye on her," Emma advised. "Try spending more time with her, and let me know if anything else comes up." For the next few days, Grace did everything she could to comfort Aspen. She spent hours in the barn, speaking softly to her, brushing her coat, and trying to coax her into eating. But Aspen remained distant, her appetite gone, and her energy dwindling. As Grace sat in the barn one chilly evening, leaning against Aspen's stall, she noticed the mare's gaze fixed on the corner of the stable yard. It was the same spot Aspen had been staring at every evening since she had stopped eating. The area was empty, save for a few scattered hay bales and an old gate. "What are you looking at, girl?" Grace whispered. Aspen's ears twitched, but she didn't move. Grace's curiosity grew. Something in that corner was holding Aspen's attention, and Grace was determined to find out what. Little did she know, the answer would lead her to a discovery she never could have imagined. Grace couldn't shake the feeling that Aspen's behavior was tied to the empty corner of the stable yard. Over the next few days, she noticed the mare's eyes lingering on the same spot, her ears twitching, as if listening for something just beyond human perception. Grace's gut told her there was more to Aspen's strange behavior than she understood, and she resolved to investigate. One brisk afternoon, Grace decided to explore the area. Pulling on her heavy boots and a warm jacket, she stepped out into the frosty air. Aspen watched her go, letting out a soft, almost pleading nicker. "Don't worry, girl," Grace said over her shoulder. "I'll figure this out." The corner of the yard was unremarkable at first glance. It held a pile of old wooden boards, a disused gate leaning against the fence, and a scattering of dried leaves. But as Grace moved closer, she noticed something odd. The ground beneath the leaves appeared uneven, as though it had been disturbed recently. Her heart quickened. Grabbing a pitchfork from the barn, Grace began to clear the debris. The layers of leaves and straw came away easily, revealing patches of soil that had been churned up and compacted again. Grace knelt down, running her fingers over the ground. It didn't feel like a natural disturbance. It was too deliberate. "What happened here?" she murmured, glancing back at the barn. Aspen's gaze met hers from across the yard, her brown eyes wide and imploring. Grace's hands trembled as she dug deeper, using the pitchfork to loosen the compacted soil. After several minutes, the tool struck something hard. She froze, her pulse racing. Carefully, she brushed away the remaining dirt with her hands, revealing the edge of a wooden box buried in the ground. Her heart pounded as she unearthed the box and lifted it out. It was small and old, its wooden surface weathered and cracked. The lid was secured with a rusty latch that gave way easily under her fingers. Inside, she found a bundle of papers tied with twine, their edges yellowed with age. "What is this?" Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. She carried the box into the barn and set it on a workbench near Aspen's stall. The mare nickered softly, her ears pricking forward as if sensing that Grace was on the right track. With trembling hands, Grace untied the twine and unfolded the papers. The first was a faded photograph of a young girl standing beside a horse that looked strikingly similar to Aspen, a chestnut mare with a white blaze down her nose. The second paper was a handwritten letter. Grace squinted at the spidery cursive, her heart sinking as she began to read. "To whomever finds this, this is my dearest Aspen, the horse who has been my solace and my strength. She belonged to my late husband John, who passed far too young. Aspen carried me through the hardest years of my life, but now my time has come. and I must leave her behind. I have no family to care for her, and it breaks my heart to think she may end up in a place where she is not loved as she deserves. I buried this box with her photograph and my story, hoping that one day someone kind will find it and understand the depth of the bond we shared. Please, if you've found this, take care of her. She is more than a horse. She is a piece of my soul. Sincerely, Margaret Easton. By the time Grace finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. She looked over at Aspen, who was watching her intently, her ears flicking back and forth. Grace walked over to the mare, wrapping her arms around her neck. "You're Margaret's Aspen," she whispered. "You've been waiting for someone to remember her, haven't you?" Aspen let out a soft whinny, pressing her muzzle against Grace's shoulder. It was as if the mare understood that her secret had been uncovered. Grace spent the rest of the evening poring over the contents of the box. The photograph showed a young woman in her 20s, smiling brightly as she stood beside Aspen in what appeared to be the very stable yard Grace now called home. Other papers included old receipts for Aspen's care, a few more letters, and a tattered notebook filled with Margaret's reflections on her life with the horse. Reading Margaret's words, Grace felt a deep connection to the woman she had never met. It was clear that Margaret had loved Aspen fiercely, and the thought of the mare losing such a bond was heartbreaking. But there was still one question Grace couldn't answer. Why had Aspen stopped eating now? She had lived at Blue Haven for years without issue. What had changed? The next morning, Grace returned to the barn with renewed determination. She showed the photograph to Emma, the vet, who was equally moved by the story. "This explains a lot," Emma said, running her hand along Aspen's neck. "Horses form bonds that can last a lifetime. It's possible she's been mourning Margaret in her own way, even if she seemed fine on the surface." "But why now?" Grace asked. "Why would she suddenly stop eating?" Emma thought for a moment. Sometimes emotions surface when something triggers a memory. Was there anything new in her environment? Any change that might have reminded her of Margaret? Grace frowned, racking her brain. Then it hit her, the old gate in the corner of the yard. She had moved it there a few weeks ago while clearing out an unused storage shed. It was the same gate Margaret and Aspen had posed in front of in the photograph. "She must have recognized it," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "It brought everything back." Emma nodded. "Horses have remarkable memories. The best thing you can do is show her she's still loved and that she has a place here." Grace spent the next few days showering Aspen with attention, speaking to her softly and reminding her of all the love she still had. Slowly but surely, Aspen began to come around. She nibbled at her hay, then eventually ate an apple Grace offered her. The mare's spirit seemed to lift, her eyes regaining their familiar warmth. Aspen's slow recovery gave Grace a sense of hope. The mare had begun to eat again, albeit in small portions, and her energy was gradually returning. Each day, Grace spent extra time with Aspen, brushing her coat, talking to her, and reading more of Margaret's letters aloud. Aspen seemed to respond to the sound of Grace's voice, her ears twitching and her body relaxing as the words filled the barn. It wasn't just about Aspen's recovery anymore. For Grace, it had become a mission to honor Margaret's memory and the extraordinary bond she had shared with the horse. She felt as though she'd been chosen, not by chance, but by Aspen herself, to be the next chapter in the mayor's life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grace sat on a bale of hay with Aspen's head resting on her lap. She ran her fingers through the mare's soft mane, gazing out at the peaceful expanse of Blue Haven stables. "You know, girl," she said softly, "Margaret must have loved you so much. I can feel it in every word she wrote. She'd want you to be happy, and I'll do everything I can to make sure of that." Aspen nickered softly, her dark eyes closing as if in agreement. That night, Grace made a decision. She would create a permanent tribute to Margaret and Aspen's story, a way to honor their bond and ensure it was never forgotten. She spent hours sketching ideas at her kitchen table, her mind brimming with possibilities. The next morning, Grace reached out to local craftsmen and artists, sharing Margaret's story and her vision for the tribute. The community rallied around her, moved by the tale of Aspen and the letters that had been unearthed. Together, they decided to restore the neglected corner of the stable yard where the box had been buried, turning it into a memorial garden. The transformation began immediately. Volunteers arrived with shovels, plants, and tools, working tirelessly to clear the area and create a peaceful space. Grace salvaged the old gate from the pile of debris, sanding and repainting it until it gleamed with new life. The gate became the centerpiece of the garden, a symbol of the connection between past and present. Around the gate, they planted vibrant flowers and hardy shrubs, choosing varieties that would thrive in all seasons. A local artist donated a hand-carved wooden bench, and another offered to craft a plaque with Margaret's name and a short inscription, "In loving memory of Margaret Easton and her beloved Aspen, a bond that transcends time." The work took weeks, but by the time it was complete, the corner of the yard had been transformed into a tranquil haven. The garden radiated peace and beauty, a fitting tribute to the love Margaret and Aspen had shared. On the day of the garden's unveiling, the stables were abuzz with activity. Friends, neighbors, and even a few strangers who had heard about the story gathered to celebrate. Aspen stood at the edge of the garden, her coat gleaming in the sunlight, her head held high as though she understood the significance of the moment. Grace stepped forward, her heart pounding as she addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "When I found Aspen's letters, I realized her story wasn't just about the past. It was about love, resilience, and the connections we share with the animals who enrich our lives. This garden is a way to honor that story and to remind us of the incredible bonds we're capable of." The crowd erupted into applause as the veil covering the plaque was pulled away, revealing Margaret's name and the inscription. Grace turned to Aspen, tears glistening in her eyes. "This is for you, girl," she said, stroking the mare's neck. "You've brought so much love into my life. I can only hope I'm giving back a fraction of what Margaret gave you." Aspen responded with a gentle nudge, her eyes soft and trusting. Grace smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey she and Aspen had shared over the past weeks had brought them closer than she ever could have imagined. As the crowd began to disperse, Grace noticed a young girl lingering near the garden. The child, no older than 10, had wide, curious eyes and a shy smile. She held a sketchbook in her hands, the pages filled with drawings of horses. "That's a beautiful garden," the girl said softly as Grace approached. "Thank you," Grace replied, kneeling to the girl's level. "Do you like horses?" The girl nodded eagerly. "I love them. I've been saving up for riding lessons. Maybe one day I'll have a horse like Aspen." Grace smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "Aspen's pretty special, isn't she?" "She looks so happy," the girl said, glancing at the mare. "It's like she knows this garden is for her." Grace looked over at Aspen, who was grazing peacefully near the gate. "She does," Grace said. "She's been through a lot, but she's come out stronger, just like Margaret would have wanted." The girl beamed, her sketchbook clutched tightly to her chest. "Maybe someday I can have a garden like this for my horse." "You'll make it happen," Grace said with a wink. "Dreams have a way of coming true if you hold on to them." That evening, as the sun set over the stable yard, Grace sat on the wooden bench in the garden, Aspen grazing nearby. The mare's health had fully returned, her coat shining and her eyes bright with contentment. The garden was quiet now, the flowers bathed in the warm glow of twilight. Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out Margaret's letters, reading through them once more. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for Margaret, for Aspen, and for the journey that had brought them together. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Grace looked up and whispered, "Thank you, Margaret. I promised to take care of her, just like you did." Aspen walked over and nuzzled Grace's shoulder, her presence a comforting reminder of the love that had brought them to this moment. Together, they sat in the quiet of the garden, the bond between them unbreakable, a living testament to the power of connection and the enduring spirit of love.